The late afternoon sun scorched the endless grasslands of Wyoming Territory, painting the red rock formations in shades of copper and rust. The year was 1887, and the West was still wild, still untamed, still governed by the gun and the will of those strong enough to survive its harsh embrace. Dust devils danced across the parched earth, and the distant mountains stood like ancient sentinels against a sky so vast it could swallow a man's dreams whole. Clara Bennett stood on the porch of her father's ranch house, shading her eyes against the glare. At 23, she possessed the kind of beauty that bloomed despite the harsh prairie winds, sun-kissed skin, auburn hair that caught fire in the light, and eyes the color of sage honey. But it was her spirit that truly set her apart in this land of rigid expectations. While other women of the territory concerned themselves with quilting bees and church socials, Clara could rope a steer, mend a fence, and shoot straighter than most men. "Clara, get inside," her father, Samuel Bennett, called from the doorway. "Storm's coming in from the north." She could see it, a wall of darkness creeping across the horizon, lightning flickering within its depths like trapped fireflies. The cattle were already restless, their lowing carried on the wind that smelled of rain and electricity. That was when she saw him. The lone rider appeared as if born from the storm itself, pushing his mount hard across the flatlands, even from a distance. Clara could tell something was wrong. The horse's gait was uneven. The rider slumped forward in the saddle. Behind him, barely visible through the dust, came 3 more riders, closing fast. "Pa!" she called, but Samuel had already gone inside. Clara's hand moved instinctively to the Winchester propped against the porch railing. She knew the look of hunters and prey, and this chase would end in blood if someone didn't intervene. The lead rider's horse stumbled, nearly throwing him. He managed to stay mounted, but his pursuers were gaining ground. Clara could hear their whoops and hollers now, carried on the wind like the cries of wolves. Bounty hunters. She recognized the type. Men who made their living tracking those whom the law wanted dead or alive, and who rarely cared which option they delivered. Without thinking, Clara grabbed the rifle and vaulted over the porch railing. Her boots hit the dirt running as she headed for the barn. "Jake! Tom!" she called to the ranch hands, but the approaching storm had driven everyone to shelter. She saddled her mare, Buttercup, with practiced efficiency. Her fingers steady despite the urgency thrumming through her veins. The first fat raindrops began to fall as she swung into the saddle and spurred the horse toward the chase. The riders were closer now. She could see the fleeing man wore dark clothes, a long duster coat whipping behind him like broken wings. His hat was gone, revealing black hair plastered to his head with sweat or rain. The hunters were gaining, their guns drawn. Clara fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the Winchester split the gathering storm, causing all 4 riders to wheel their horses in confusion. She rode hard between them, Buttercup's hooves throwing up clods of mud. "This is Bennett land," she shouted over the rising wind. "No hunting here." One of the bounty hunters, a grizzled man with a week's worth of stubble, sneered at her. "Step aside, Missy. That there's Jake Thornton. $500 bounty on his head, wanted dead or alive for murder and robbery." Clara's gaze flicked to the hunted man. He sat straighter now, and she caught her first clear look at his face. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against his sun-weathered skin. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as the storm clouds above, holding a mixture of defiance and something else. Pain, perhaps, or resignation. "Don't care if he's the devil himself," Clara said, keeping her rifle trained on the bounty hunters. "My father's rule is no blood spilled on Bennett land. You want him. You wait for him off our property." "Now see here," the lead hunter began. But Clara chambered another round with a decisive click. "Storm's getting worse," she said calmly. "You boys best find shelter. Town's 10 miles south." Thunder crashed overhead, and the rain began in earnest, a torrential downpour that turned the world into a gray blur. The bounty hunters exchanged glances, their horses dancing nervously as lightning forked across the sky. "This ain't over," the grizzled one promised, pointing at Thornton. "We'll be waiting. Scarface can't hide forever." They wheeled their horses and rode south, vanishing into the storm. Clara lowered her rifle, rain streaming down her face. Thornton hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He simply watched her with those storm-gray eyes. "You're bleeding," she said, noticing the dark stain spreading across his side. "Been bleeding for a while now," he replied, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Reckon I'll keep bleeding whether you help me or not." Clara made a decision that would change everything. "There's a line shack about a mile north. No one uses it anymore. Can you make it?" He nodded once, though she could see the effort it cost him. They rode through the storm, Clara leading the way through familiar paths, now transformed by darkness and rain. The line shack appeared like a ghost from the gloom, a simple structure of logs and mud chinking, built years ago for cowboys working the far ranges. Inside, it was dry but cold. Clara lit the oil lamp she knew would be there, casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. Thornton stood swaying in the doorway, water pooling at his feet. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to the narrow cot. "Let me see." He shrugged out of his duster with a grimace. The shirt beneath was soaked with rain and blood. Clara had seen enough injured ranch hands to know what to do. She found the medical supplies her father insisted on keeping in every line shack and set to work. The bullet had grazed his ribs, leaving a deep furrow that bled freely but hadn't hit anything vital. As she cleaned and bandaged the wound, she was aware of his eyes on her face, studying her with an intensity that made her hands tremble slightly. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why what? Why help me? You heard them. I'm wanted. Dangerous." Clara tied off the bandage and sat back on her heels. "Are you dangerous?" A smile ghosted across his lips, transforming the harsh planes of his face. "Sometimes, when I need to be." "But not to me." "No," he said softly. "Not to you." The storm raged outside, turning the little shack into an island in a sea of wind and rain. They sat in the lamplight, two strangers brought together by chance and violence. Clara should have been afraid, alone with an outlaw, but she felt only a strange sense of rightness, as if this moment had been waiting for her all her life. "What did you do?" she asked. "To earn that bounty?" His jaw tightened. "Killed a man, shot him dead in a saloon in Cheyenne." "Why?" "Because he killed my brother. Shot him in the back over a card game. Law said it was self-defense. Said my brother drew first, but Tom never carried a gun in his life." The bitterness in his voice was sharp as alkali. "So I found justice my own way. Now I'm the one running." Clara understood. In this land, justice and law were often two different things. She'd seen good men hang while bad men prospered, all in the name of civilization. "Clara," she said. "Clara Bennett. Jake Thornton," he replied, then laughed shortly. "But I guess you already knew that." They talked through the night as the storm spent its fury. He told her of his life before, a small ranch in Colorado, dreams of raising horses, a future cut short by violence. She told him of her struggles against the expectations placed on women, her father's plans to marry her off to the banker's son, her secret dreams of freedom. "You saved my life," Jake said as dawnlight began to filter through the cracks in the walls. "That's a debt I won't forget." "No debt," Clara said. "Just human decency." He stood, testing his side. The bleeding had stopped. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. But they both knew this interlude was ending. "I have to go," he said. "They'll come to your ranch, ask questions. Better if I'm long gone." Clara felt something tear inside her chest. "Where will you go?" "West, maybe California. Somewhere they won't know my name." They stood facing each other in the doorway of the shack. The morning air was cool and sweet, filled with the scent of sage and wet earth. Jake reached out, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. "One secret night," he said softly, "and I'll never forget." She wanted to tell him to stay, to fight, to let her help him, but the words wouldn't come. This was his path to ride, just as she had hers. He mounted his horse with careful movements, favoring his injured side. Clara watched as he turned the animal west, toward the mountains and whatever lay beyond. At the last moment, he looked back, touching the brim of his hat in farewell. Then he was gone, swallowed by the vastness of the prairie, leaving Clara standing alone in the doorway of the line shack. She pressed her hand to her cheek where he had touched her, feeling as if she'd aged a lifetime in one night. The sun climbed higher, burning off the storm's memory. Soon, she would have to return to the ranch, to face questions and suspicions. But for now, she simply stood and watched the empty horizon, carrying the secret of this night like a flame in her heart, knowing that something fundamental had shifted in her world. In the distance, a red-tailed hawk cried, wheeling against the endless blue, and Clara Bennett, daughter of the prairie, keeper of secrets, finally turned and walked back to her horse, back to her life, forever changed by one secret night with the scarred outlaw who rode into her world on the wings of a storm. The dawn broke empty and desolate over the Bennett ranch, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and amber. Clara rode back slowly, her mind churning with the events of the night. Buttercup's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust from the rain-dampened earth, and the familiar sights of home, the weathered barn, the corrals, the windmill creaking in the morning breeze, seemed somehow foreign to her now. She unsaddled her mare in silence, her movements automatic while her thoughts remained fixed on gray eyes and gentle fingers against her cheek. The barn smelled of hay and leather, comforting scents that now carried an undertone of longing she'd never noticed before. Clara Bennett, where in the Lord's name have you been? Her mother, Margaret, stood in the barn doorway, arms crossed over her chest. Even at this early hour, she was impeccably dressed, her graying hair pinned severely back, her expression a mixture of worry and disapproval. The storm caught me out checking the north pasture. Clara lied smoothly, hanging the saddle on its peg, waited it out in the old line shack. Margaret's sharp eyes missed nothing, not the mud on Clara's boots, not the weariness in her daughter's face, and certainly not the Winchester that had clearly been fired recently. Your father's been worried sick. Those bounty hunters came by at dawn, asking questions. Clara's heart skipped, but she kept her expression neutral. What kind of questions? About some outlaw. Said they tracked him onto our land before losing him in the storm. Margaret moved closer, studying her daughter's face. You didn't see anything? Just rain and lightning, Clara said, meeting her mother's gaze steadily. What did Pa tell them? To get off our property unless they had a warrant. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Come inside. Breakfast is waiting, and you look like you haven't slept. The ranch house was warm and filled with the aroma of coffee and biscuit. Clara's younger brother, William, sat at the table, shoveling eggs into his mouth with teenage enthusiasm. At 17, he was all gangly limbs and eager energy, desperate to prove himself a man in this hard country. Heard there was excitement last night, he said through a mouthful of food. Wish I'd seen those bounty hunters. They say Jake Thornton's got the fastest draw in 3 territories. Don't talk with your mouth full, Margaret scolded, but Clara saw her parents exchange a meaningful glance. Samuel Bennett set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. The Carvers lost 20 head of cattle last week. Dried up waterhole. This drought's getting worse. It was true. The spring rains had been meager, and now summer was proving brutal. The grass was already turning brown, and the creek that usually ran year-round was down to a trickle. Clara had seen it all her life, the cycle of plenty and want that governed ranch life. But this felt different, more ominous. Perhaps it's time to consider Mr. Morrison's offer, Margaret said carefully, not looking at her daughter. Clara's fork clattered against her plate. What offer? Now, Clara, Samuel began, but she was already pushing back from the table. What offer? Pa? Her father sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 53 years. Theodore Morrison approached me last week. His son James has expressed interest. The Morrison Bank holds the notes on half the ranches in the county. A union between our families would secure our future. Drought or no drought. James Morrison is a pompous fool who thinks women are decorative furniture, Clara said flatly. He's also heir to the largest fortune in the territory. Margaret countered. You're 23. Clara, well past time. To be sold off like prize breeding stock? Clara's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. To spend my life simping and smiling while James Morrison parades me around like a trophy? Clara! Margaret's face flushed with indignation. No one is selling anyone. This is about survival, about ensuring this ranch continues for another generation. The ranch will survive because we'll make it survive, Clara said, through work and determination, not by marrying me off to the highest bidder. She stormed out before anyone could respond, letting the screen door slam behind her. The morning sun was already fierce, promising another scorching day. In the distance, she could see the cattle clustered around the remaining water, their ribs beginning to show through their hides. Word of the outlaw spread through the county like wildfire. By noon, it seemed everyone in the territory knew Jake Thornton had been spotted, that the bounty on his head had been raised to $700. The general store in town had his wanted poster prominently displayed, a rough sketch that didn't capture the intensity of his eyes or the way his scar pulled when he almost smiled. Clara went about her daily chores mechanically, her body working while her mind wandered. She helped William mend the fence in the east pasture, the sun beating down mercilessly on their backs. She could feel him watching her, questions bubbling just beneath the surface. Did you really not see anything last night? He finally asked as they stretched new wire between posts. Clara kept her eyes on her work. Why would you think I did? Because you're different today. Like you're here but not here. William was more perceptive than she'd given him credit for. And because I know you, Clara, you wouldn't let bounty hunters hunt a man on our land, guilty or not. She looked at her little brother, seeing the man he was becoming beneath the boyish features. Sometimes, she said carefully, the law and what's right aren't the same thing. William nodded slowly. Pa taught us that, but he also taught us that getting tangled up with outlaws only leads to trouble. I'm not tangled up with anyone, Clara said, perhaps too quickly. That afternoon, a delegation from town arrived. Mayor Randolph, a portly man who sweated through his vest even in winter, led the group. With him came Sheriff Coleman, James Morrison, and several other prominent citizens. Clara watched from the porch as they conferred with her father by the corrals. James Morrison kept glancing her way, and she recognized the proprietary look in his eyes. At 25, he was handsome in a soft, pampered way, with carefully pomaded hair and clothes that had never seen a day's real work. Everything about him set her teeth on edge. Miss Bennett, he called out, separating from the group to approach the porch. You're looking lovely despite these trying circumstances. Mr. Morrison, she acknowledged coolly, not moving from her position. He climbed the steps, standing too close, bringing with him the cloying scent of hair tonic. I heard you had quite an adventure last night, facing down those ruffians all alone. Very brave, though perhaps not entirely prudent. I can take care of myself. I'm sure you can, he said with a condescending smile. But a woman shouldn't have to. That's what husbands are for. Protection, guidance, ensuring proper behavior. Clara's hands clenched around the porch railing. And what makes you think I need any of those things? Every woman does, whether she admits it or not. He moved closer still, lowering his voice. I've spoken to your father. Clara, the ranch is struggling. This drought will break many families before it's done, but together, united, we could weather any storm. Pretty words, Clara said, but I'm not interested in being anyone's weather vane. His face hardened slightly. You may find, Miss Bennett, that in times like these, interest becomes less important than necessity. Before she could respond, Sheriff Coleman called out, Morrison, we're heading back. James touched the brim of his hat mockingly. Think about it, Clara. My offer won't stand forever. As the delegation rode away, Clara saw her father walking slowly toward the house. His shoulders bowed as if carrying a great weight. The drought wasn't just killing the grass, it was killing hopes, dreams, the very way of life they'd built on these plains. That night at dinner, the tension was thick as dust. Samuel finally spoke as Margaret cleared the plates. "The sheriff thinks Thornton's headed for Mexico. They're organizing a posse." "Good," Margaret said firmly. "The sooner that element is removed from the territory, the safer we'll all be." "Is he really so dangerous?" Clara asked, unable to help herself. Her father studied her carefully. "They say he gunned down Marcus Webb in cold blood. Webb was unarmed, playing cards in the Dollar Saloon. Thornton walked in, called him out, and shot him dead when he stood up." "But why?" Clara pressed. "What was the reason? Does it matter?" Margaret interjected. "Murder is murder." But Clara remembered Jake's voice in the lamplight, the pain when he spoke of his brother. There was more to the story. There always was. The West was full of official truths that covered darker realities. That night, sleep eluded her. She stood at her window, looking out at the moonlit landscape, remembering one secret night. He'd said, but secrets had a way of refusing to stay buried, especially in a place where everyone watched everyone else, where drought and hardship made people desperate. In the distance, a coyote howled, lonely and wild. Clara pressed her fingers to the glass, wondering where Jake was now, if his wound was healing, if he thought of her at all. The rational part of her mind knew she should forget him, should accept that their paths had crossed briefly and diverged forever. But her heart, stubborn and untamed as the land itself, refused to listen to reason. It held on to the memory of gray eyes and gentle hands, of understanding found in the most unlikely place. And as she finally drifted toward sleep, Clara made a promise to herself. Whatever came next, whatever pressures family or society brought to bear, she would not surrender who she was. The drought could parch the land, tradition could demand conformity, but the spark Jake Thornton had ignited in her soul would not be extinguished, not by James Morrison's money, not by her mother's expectations, and not by all the proper behavior in the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressures, but tonight, in the secret chambers of her heart, Clara Bennett held fast to the memory of a scarred outlaw who'd shown her that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world was not a man with a gun, but the courage to follow your own path. The bounty hunters descended upon the county like vultures sensing death. They came from all corners of the territory, drawn by the increased reward and the legendary reputation of their quarry. Hard men with harder faces. They filled the saloons in town, their spurs jangling against wooden floors, their eyes constantly scanning for any sign of the scarred outlaw. Clara couldn't escape them. Every trip to town for supplies meant navigating their hostile presence. They lounged outside the general store, studied every face that passed, questioned anyone who might have information. The very air seemed charged with menace and greed. $700, she heard one grizzled hunter tell another as she selected fabric at Henderson's Mercantile. Could set a man up proper with that kind of money. If Thornton don't put a bullet in him first, his companion replied. They say he's killed 8 men, maybe more. Mrs. Henderson, the shopkeeper's wife, clucked her tongue disapprovingly. These are dark times indeed when our streets are filled with such rough characters. My husband says Mayor Randolph should wire for federal marshals. Clara paid for her purchases quickly, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere. But as she stepped onto the boardwalk, she nearly collided with James Morrison, who seemed to have been waiting for her. "Clara," he said, catching her elbow to steady her. "How fortunate. I was hoping we might speak." She pulled away from his touch. "I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Morrison, but I have something to say to you." His usual smugness was tinged with something harder. "My father and yours have been discussing terms. The wedding could be as soon as next month." "Wedding?" Clara's voice rose sharply. "There will be no wedding." "Come now," James said, steering her away from curious ears. "Let's be practical. Your family's ranch is failing. 3 more weeks without rain and your cattle will start dying. My family's bank, your family's bank can go to blazes." Clara interrupted. His face darkened. You should watch your tongue. Soon enough, you'll be Mrs. James Morrison, and I won't tolerate such language from my wife. I will never be your wife. James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We'll see about that. Your father's a sensible man. He knows what's best for his family, even if his daughter doesn't. Clara left him standing there, her purchases clutched tightly to her chest as she hurried to where Buttercup waited. The ride home did nothing to calm her rising panic. The walls were closing in. Drought, debt, and now this forced engagement pressing from all sides. The Saturday market in town drew crowds despite the hard times. Farmers and ranchers brought what little they could spare to trade or sell. The dusty square filled with wagons, livestock, and people desperate to maintain some semblance of normal life, even as their world withered around them. Clara helped her mother sell eggs and preserved goods from a small stand. The prices were higher than usual. Everything was scarce now, but buyers were fewer. People held tight to their coins, uncertain what tomorrow might bring. Clara Bennett. A smooth voice interrupted her transaction with Mrs. Cooper. She turned to find Lucas Hartley, one of the most persistent bounty hunters, studying her with calculating eyes. I hear you had an interesting encounter the other night. I don't know what you're talking about, Clara said evenly, handing Mrs. Cooper her change. No? Hartley leaned against their stand, his presence making other customers veer away. Funny thing, we tracked Thornton right to your property line. Then he just vanished. Storm couldn't have washed away all his tracks. Perhaps he sprouted wings. Clara suggested, I hear outlaws can do that. Hartley's eyes narrowed. You've got spirit, girl. But spirit won't protect you if you're hiding a wanted man. That's aiding and abetting. That's prison time. Is there a problem here? Samuel Bennett appeared beside his daughter, his weathered face stern. No problem, Mr. Bennett, Hartley said, straightening. Just making conversation with your lovely daughter, but you might want to remind her that harboring fugitives is a serious crime. Wouldn't want anything to happen to such a respectable family. After he sauntered away, Samuel turned to Clara. What was that about? Nothing. Pa, he's just fishing. Her father studied her for a long moment. Clara, I need to know, did you see Thornton that night? She met his gaze directly, hating the lie but knowing the truth would be worse. I told you, I saw nothing but rain. The market continued around them, a swirl of activity and conversation. Clara heard snippets of talk, about the drought, about the outlaw, about which families would survive the hard times and which would be forced to sell. The Morrison name came up often, always with a mixture of resentment and resignation. They held the power of life and death over so many, their banknotes hanging like swords over desperate heads. As the afternoon wore on, the heat became oppressive. Dust devils danced between the wagons, and horses stood with drooping heads. Clara was counting their meager earnings when a commotion erupted near the saloon. 2 bounty hunters had gotten into a fight, apparently over territories or methods. They spilled into the street, fists flying, while a crowd gathered to watch. Sheriff Coleman waded in to break it up, but not before one man drew a knife. The blade flashed in the sun, and suddenly Clara was transported back to that night in the line shack, remembering Jake's hand steady despite his pain, his voice low as he spoke of justice and revenge. These men hunting him were no better than rabid dogs, turning on each other at the slightest provocation. Animals? Margaret muttered beside her. This is what comes of placing bounties on human heads. It brings out the worst in people. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the dying grassland, Clara escaped to her favorite spot, a cluster of cottonwoods by what remained of the creek. The water was barely a trickle now, but the trees still provided shade and solitude. She sat on a fallen log, her thoughts churning. How had her life become so complicated? A week ago, her biggest concern was avoiding her mother's matchmaking. Now she carried a secret that could destroy her family, faced a marriage she didn't want, and couldn't forget a man she'd known for one night. The crunch of footsteps made her tense. But it was only William, picking his way through the dry brush. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, settling beside her. "Ma's in a state. Says you were rude to James Morrison in town." "James Morrison is a pompous ass." William laughed. "True, but he's a rich pompous ass, and that seems to count for everything these days." His expression grew serious. "Clara, what really happened that night?" She was quiet for so long he probably thought she wouldn't answer. "Finally," she said. "Have you ever met someone who made you see everything differently? Like you'd been looking at the world through dirty glass, and suddenly it was clean?" "Can't say I have," William admitted. "But I'm guessing you did. It doesn't matter. He's gone." The outlaw. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded miserably. "One night, just one night of talking, of being understood. And now you're supposed to marry Morrison and forget all about it." "How can I?" The words burst out of her. "How can I bind myself to a man I despise when I know there's something else out there? Something real and dangerous and alive?" William was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, when I was younger, I used to think you were invincible. Nothing scared Clara. Nothing stopped her. You could outride, outshoot, and outthink anyone." He smiled sadly. "Guess I forgot you had a heart that could be broken like anyone else's." "It's not broken," Clara said firmly. "Just awakened. And now I don't know how to make it sleep again." They sat in companionable silence as the stars emerged, bright and cold in the vast sky. In the distance, a mockingbird sang its borrowed songs. And Clara thought about the nature of freedom, how some creatures soared while others remained caged, and how sometimes the cage was of your own making. When they finally walked back to the house, they found their parents on the porch, deep in conversation. Samuel looked up as they approached, his expression grave. "James Morrison was here," he said. "He's formally asked for your hand. Clara, I told him I'd speak with you first, but—" He spread his hands helplessly. "The drought's broken us, daughter. Without the Morrison money, we'll lose everything by winter." Clara felt the last of her defenses crumbling. She looked at her father's worn face, her mother's desperate hope, William's youth that deserved a future. How could she choose her own happiness over their survival? "I need time," she managed. "Just give me time to think." That night, sleep was impossible. Clara stood at her window again, looking out at the moonlit landscape that seemed more prison than paradise now. Somewhere out there, Jake Thornton was running, fighting, surviving. He'd chosen freedom over safety, truth over acceptance. And here she stood, about to surrender everything she was for the sake of propriety and financial security. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She'd saved an outlaw only to become prisoner herself, as a shooting star streaked across the sky. Clara made a wish she knew was hopeless. She wished for rain to save the ranch. She wished for Jake to be safe. But most of all, she wished for the courage to follow her heart, wherever it might lead. The moon continued its journey across the sky, indifferent to human dreams and desires. And Clara Bennett, caught between duty and desire, between the life expected of her and the life she yearned for, pressed her palm against the cool glass and remembered the touch of scarred hands in lamplight. The news of the robbery reached the Bennett ranch with the morning sun. Tom Hensley, their nearest neighbor, rode in hard, his horse lathered with sweat despite the early hour. "Stage got hit just outside Willow Creek," he announced, accepting a dipper of water from Clara. "3 men dead, strongbox gone. They're saying it was Thornton." Clara's hand trembled slightly as she took back the dipper. "How can they be sure?" "Witness survived. Said the leader had a scar running down his face." Hensley wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Sheriff's forming a posse. They're saying Thornton's gone mad, killing for sport now." But Clara remembered those gray eyes, the pain in Jake's voice when he spoke of his brother. The man she'd met wouldn't kill without reason. There had to be more to the story. After Hensley left, she saddled Buttercup and rode out under the pretense of checking the eastern boundary. The landscape was more desolate than ever, the grass brittle beneath her horse's hooves. The sky a merciless blue dome offering no promise of rain. She headed toward Eagle Canyon, a maze of red rock formations and hidden valleys that outlaws had used for generations. If Jake was still in the area, and something told her he was, this would be where he'd hide. The canyon's entrance was marked by towering sandstone pillars, carved by wind and time into fantastic shapes. Clara had explored these paths as a child, knew every twist and hidden spring. Now the familiar landmarks guided her deeper into the wilderness. It was near the old Peterson mine that she found the first sign, a piece of dark fabric caught on a thorny mesquite bush. The cloth was stained with what looked like dried blood. Clara's heart raced as she dismounted to examine it more closely. The fabric was fine wool, the kind used in expensive coats. She remembered Jake's duster, torn by bullet or blade. This blood was old, days old at least, but it proved someone had passed this way, someone injured. She followed the trail deeper into the canyon, reading sign like her father had taught her, a scuffed rock here, a broken branch there. The path led to a narrow defile between two towering walls of stone, barely wide enough for a horse to pass. On the other side, the canyon opened into a hidden valley, green with cottonwoods fed by an underground spring, and there, picketed near the water, stood a familiar black horse. Clara's pulse quickened. She dismounted, ground-tying Buttercup, and approached on foot. Years of ranch work had taught her to move quietly, and she used every skill now. She found him by the spring, kneeling at the water's edge. His shirt was off, revealing the bandages she'd applied, now dirty and needing change. But it was the fresh wound on his shoulder that made her gasp. A deep gash, still seeping blood. Jake spun at the sound, his gun appearing in his hand with lightning speed. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other across the barrel of his Colt. Then recognition dawned in his eyes, and he lowered the weapon. "Clara?" His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. "What in hell are you doing here?" "Looking for you," she said simply. "You shouldn't have come. It's not safe. Nowhere is safe anymore," she interrupted, moving closer. "Let me see that shoulder." He tried to wave her off, but she saw the way he swayed slightly, the pallor beneath his tan. Infection, blood loss, or both. She knelt beside him, examining the wound with practiced eyes. "This needs cleaning and stitching," she said. "What happened? Disagreement with some fellow travelers?" Jake said wryly. "They thought my horse looked familiar. The stagecoach robbery. They're saying you did it." His jaw tightened. "They say a lot of things." Clara found her medical supplies in Buttercup's saddlebags. She'd taken to carrying them everywhere since that first night. As she worked on his shoulder, Jake told her the truth. "It wasn't me, but I know who did it. Marcus Webb's brothers. They're using my name, my reputation, to cover their crimes." His voice was bitter. "Dead men make convenient scapegoats." Webb's brothers. Clara tied off a stitch, trying to ignore the way his muscles tensed under her hands. "But Webb is the man I killed." "Yes." Jake's eyes were distant, focused on some point beyond the canyon walls. "Turns out he had family, 4 brothers, each one meaner than the last. They've been dogging my trail for weeks." "So the stagecoach was carrying mine payroll. The Webb brothers knew the route, knew the guards. Hit it clean and left one survivor to swear he saw a scarred man leading the robbers." He laughed humorlessly. "Clever, really. Gets the law even more fired up to hunt me down." Clara finished the last stitch and sat back. "We have to tell someone. The sheriff." "The sheriff wants my head on a platter. No one's going to believe the word of a wanted man against a grieving family seeking justice." They sat in silence by the spring, the only sound the gentle bubble of water over stone. Clara was acutely aware of his proximity, the heat radiating from his skin, the way the filtered sunlight caught in his dark hair. "Why did you come looking for me?" Jake asked finally. Clara considered lying, but what was the point? "Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because when I'm with James Morrison, all I can remember is that night in the line shack. Because..." She took a breath. "Because my heart called, and I had to answer." Jake's hand found hers, his fingers rough but gentle. You have to forget me. Clara, I'm a dead man riding. Even if I could clear my name, there's no future for us. I don't care about the future, Clara said fiercely. I care about now, about truth, about— He kissed her then, cutting off her words. It was nothing like the chaste pecks James Morrison tried to steal. This was fire and desperation, promise and farewell all at once. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. You're engaged, Jake said, though his arms didn't release her. Not by choice. My family needs the Morrison money to survive the drought. Then marry him, live safe, have children and grow old in comfort. Clara pulled away, anger flashing in her eyes. Is that what you think I want? Safety, comfort, to be dressed up and displayed like a prize mare? It's better than being hunted. Better than watching your back every moment, never knowing if today's the day they catch up. Jake's voice was rough with emotion. I won't drag you into this life. Clara, I won't see you hurt because of me. That's not your choice to make, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew he was right. The outlaw life was no life at all. Always running, always hiding. Violence and death, constant companions. They spent the afternoon together in that hidden valley, talking and not talking, storing up memories against the dark days ahead. Jake told her about growing up in Colorado, about his brother Tom, who'd wanted nothing more than to raise horses and read books. Clara shared her own dreams, to see the ocean, to ride free without the weight of others' expectations. As the sun began its descent toward the canyon walls, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson, they both knew their time was ending. Clara rebandaged his shoulder, packed away her supplies. There's something else, Jake said as she prepared to leave. He reached into his saddlebags and pulled out a leather pouch. Take this. Clara opened it to find a stack of bills, more money than she'd ever seen. Jake, no. It's not from the robbery, he said quickly. It's everything I had saved before Tom died. I was going to use it to buy land, start that horse ranch. His smile was sad. No use to me now, but it could save your family's ranch. I can't. You can. He closed her fingers around the pouch. Let me do this one good thing. Clara, let something clean come from all this mess. Tears stung her eyes. This isn't goodbye. Yes, he said gently. It is. The Webb brothers won't stop until they've destroyed everything connected to me. I won't let that include you. He walked her to where Buttercup waited, helped her mount. As she gathered the reins, he caught her hand one last time. When your heart calls, he said softly, remember that I answered. Remember that for one perfect afternoon. We had this— Clara wanted to protest, to rage against the unfairness of it all. Instead, she leaned down and kissed him once more, pouring all her frustrated dreams into that single touch. Then she rode away, not looking back, knowing that if she did, she'd never have the strength to leave behind her. Jake Thornton stood watching until horse and rider disappeared into the canyon's shadows, carrying with them the last light of something that might have been beautiful in a kinder world. The ride home was the longest of Clara's life. The money in her saddlebags could save the ranch, could buy her freedom from James Morrison. But it felt like 30 pieces of silver, the price of betraying her own heart. As she emerged from the canyon, the vast expanse of dying grassland stretched before her, and Clara Bennett understood with terrible clarity that some prisons were built not of iron bars but of duty and circumstance, and that the cruelest chains were those we fastened around our own hearts. The hidden valley lay shrouded in twilight when Clara returned 3 days later. She'd tried to stay away, tried to convince herself that Jake's goodbye was final, but something pulled her back, a nagging worry that gnawed at her bones, a sense that all was not well. Her instincts proved correct. She found him collapsed near the spring, his fever so high she could feel the heat radiating from him before she even touched his skin. The shoulder wound had turned angry and red, infection spreading its poison through his body. Jake, she whispered, cradling his head in her lap. His eyes opened, unfocused and glassy. Clara, His voice was barely a rasp. "No, told you. Dangerous." "Hush," she said, already working to cool his burning skin with water from the spring. "Save your strength." She worked through the night, using every bit of knowledge her mother had taught her about healing. Willow bark tea for the fever, honey and whiskey to clean the wound, poultices of herbs she gathered from the canyon. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost in fevered dreams where he called out for his brother. "Tom, get down!" he shouted once, trying to rise. "Behind you!" Clara held him down, murmuring soothing words. In his delirium, he revealed more about that terrible night in Cheyenne, how Marcus Webb had goaded Tom into the card game, how Webb had a derringer hidden in his sleeve, how Tom had tried to leave peacefully, only to be shot in the back as he walked away. "Self-defense, they called it," Jake muttered, tears leaking from his closed eyes. Tom never even owned a gun. 22 years old, and they shot him down like a dog. Clara's heart broke for him, for the gentle brother lost to violence, for the man Jake had been before vengeance consumed him. She understood now why he'd hunted Webb down, why he'd thrown away his own life for a moment of justice. By dawn, the fever had broken. Jake woke clear-eyed, finding Clara still beside him, dark circles under her eyes from the sleepless night. "You came back," he said wonderingly. "Someone had to keep you from dying," she replied, trying for lightness despite her exhaustion. "You're terrible at taking care of yourself." He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. "Clara Bennett, you're going to be the death of me. Not if I can help it." They spent the day in quiet companionship. Clara redressed his wounds, satisfied to see the infection retreating. Jake was weak but improving, able to sit up and take solid food. As afternoon painted the canyon walls gold, he told her more about his life before, the small ranch in Colorado, the dreams he and Tom had shared. "We were going to breed horses," he said, staring into the middle distance. "Tom had read every book on bloodlines and breeding, said we could produce the finest cow ponies in the territory." His smile was sad. "He was always the smart one. I just knew horses." "You still know horses," Clara pointed out. "That knowledge didn't die with Tom." "No, but the dream did." Jake's expression hardened. "Hard to build a future when you're running from the past." That evening, as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Jake grew serious. "The Webb brothers, I've heard they're close. Maybe a day behind, maybe less. You need to leave. Clara, tonight. I'm not leaving you here alone, wounded and weak, and I won't have your blood on my hands." His gray eyes bored into hers. "Please, if they find you here with me." "Then we leave together," Clara said firmly. "You can ride?" "Not fast enough to outrun them, not far enough to matter." Jake shook his head. "My fight isn't yours." "You're wrong," Clara said quietly. "The moment you rode onto Bennett land, the moment I chose to help you, your fight became mine. That's what caring for someone means. Their battles become your battles." Jake was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice so low she almost missed it, he said, "I love you. Clara Bennett. Loved you from that first night, standing there with your rifle, fierce as any warrior. That's why I have to let you go." Clara's breath caught. It was the first time either of them had spoken the word aloud, though it had hung between them unspoken for days. "And I love you, Jake Thornton. Love you for your pain and your courage and your stubborn honor. That's why I won't leave." They held each other as darkness fell, two souls finding shelter in the storm of their circumstances. Jake told her about places he'd seen, mountains that touched the sky, deserts painted in impossible colors, rivers that ran silver with fish. Clara shared her own dreams, the books she'd read about far-off places, the adventures she'd imagined before life locked her into its narrow channels. "In another life," Jake murmured against her hair, "I'd have courted you proper, brought flowers to your door, asked your father's permission, married you in that little church in town. In another life." Clara replied, I might have wanted that, but in this life, I just want you alive and free." They made no promises about tomorrow, knowing how fragile such things were. Instead, they focused on the moment, the warmth of the fire, the gentle sound of the spring, the vast canopy of stars overhead. Clara helped Jake walk to strengthen his legs, and he showed her how to read the night sky for direction. "That's Polaris," he said, pointing. "The constant star. No matter where you go, no matter how lost you get, find that star and you can find your way home." "What if home isn't a place?" Clara asked. "What if it's a person?" Jake pulled her closer. "Then you hold tight to that person and never let go." But even as he said it, they both knew he would let go. His love for her demanded it. The Webb brothers were coming, bringing death in their wake, and Jake would die before he let that darkness touch her. Near midnight, Clara dozed against his shoulder, exhausted from the night's vigil and the emotional toll of the day. Jake stayed awake, memorizing every detail of her face in the firelight, the way her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks, the determined set of her jaw even in sleep, the wild curls that refused to be tamed by pins or propriety. She was everything he'd never dared dream of, strong and gentle, fierce and tender, a woman who could stand beside a man as an equal rather than behind him as a shadow. In a just world, he would have had a lifetime to love her. In this world, he had only these stolen moments. A coyote howled in the distance, and Jake tensed. That was no animal. It was a signal. The Webb brothers used such calls to communicate during their hunts. They were closer than he'd thought. Gently, careful not to wake her, Jake eased Clara down onto his bedroll. She murmured but didn't wake, trusting him even in sleep. He wrote a quick note with a stub of pencil, placed it where she'd find it, then gathered his few possessions. His shoulders screamed as he saddled his horse, but he gritted his teeth and worked through the pain. Better to die free than wait for death to find him. Better to lead the danger away from the woman he loved than see her caught in the crossfire. He took one last look at Clara sleeping by the dying fire, printing the image on his heart. Then Jake Thornton, outlaw and lover, mounted his horse and rode into the darkness, following his own advice, finding his constant star and riding toward it, even knowing it led not home but to a final reckoning with the shadows that pursued him. When Clara woke at dawn, she found only the note, weighted down with the leather pouch of money she'd tried to refuse. "My constant star, forgive me. When your heart calls, I will answer. But first I must face what cannot be outrun. Use the money. Live free. Remember me not as the man who left, but as the one who loved you enough to go, forever yours. Jay." Clara clutched the note to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She understood what he'd done and why. Understood that his love had demanded this sacrifice. But understanding didn't ease the pain of waking alone, of knowing he'd ridden toward almost certain death to protect her. She stayed in the hidden valley until full daylight, part of her hoping he'd change his mind and return. But only silence greeted her, broken by the mourning doves whose calls seemed to echo the grief in her heart. Finally, she mounted Buttercup and began the long ride home, carrying with her the memory of these stolen days, the taste of spring water and dreams, the warmth of strong arms and whispered promises, the bittersweet knowledge that she had been loved truly and completely by a man who valued her life above his own. The money in her saddlebags could save her family's ranch, but as Clara rode through the canyon's shadows toward the harsh light of day, she knew that part of her would remain forever in that hidden valley, waiting for a scarred outlaw who had taught her that sometimes the greatest love stories were the ones that ended with riding away. The news swept through the territory like wildfire. The bounty on Jake Thornton had been raised to $1,000, an astronomical sum that drew every gun for hire west of the Mississippi. The Webb brothers had added their own family money to the pot, determined to see their version of justice done. Clara returned to find the Bennett Ranch in chaos. Sheriff Coleman's horse stood at the hitching post, and raised voices carried from the house. She slipped in through the back door, but her mother spotted her immediately. "Clara Jane Bennett," Margaret's face was white with fury. "Where have you been? 3 days. Clara, 3 days with no word." She was with him," Sheriff Coleman interrupted, his weathered face grim. "Weren't you? Miss Bennett, Lucas Hartley saw you riding toward Eagle Canyon, found tracks leading to that old hideout by Peterson's mine." Clara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "I was checking our boundary lines. The droughts pushed the cattle farther than usual." "Don't lie to me, girl." Coleman's voice was hard. "We know Thornton was holed up there. Found blood, bandages, clear signs someone tended him." He stepped closer. "Aiding a fugitive is a hanging offense." "Then hang me," Clara said quietly. "But you'll need more than suspicions and Lucas Hartley's word." Samuel Bennett stepped between them. "That's enough. Sheriff, unless you have proof my daughter committed a crime, I'll ask you to leave our home." Coleman's jaw worked. The Webb brothers are offering their own reward, $500 to anyone who provides information leading to Thornton's capture. That's on top of the official bounty. He looked directly at Clara. $1,500 total, more money than most folks see in a lifetime. Sure would solve a family's drought troubles. "Get out," Samuel said, his voice dangerously quiet. After Coleman left, Clara faced her parents' wrath, but when she quietly placed the leather pouch on the kitchen table, their anger dissolved into stunned silence. "Where did this come from?" her father asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "It's honestly earned money," Clara said. "From before. He was saving it to buy land, to build a life. He wanted your ranch to survive." Margaret sank into a chair. "Oh, Clara, what have you done?" "I helped a wounded man. I followed my conscience." Clara's voice was steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "And I fell in love." The silence stretched until William, who'd been listening from the doorway, spoke up. "So what do we do with the money?" Samuel stared at the bills as if they might burst into flames. "We pay off the Morrison banknote. We save our ranch. We give Clara the freedom to choose her own path." He looked up at his daughter. "That's what he wanted, isn't it? Your freedom?" Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. That evening, James Morrison arrived with his father and a notary. They expected to finalize the engagement, to sign papers that would bind Clara to James in exchange for financial salvation. Instead, Samuel Bennett laid the full payment on the table, every cent owed, plus interest. The elder Morrison's face went purple. "Where did you get this money?" "Cattle sale." Samuel lied smoothly. "Found a buyer from California willing to pay premium prices." James looked stunned. "But the engagement is off," Clara said firmly. "I thank you for your interest, Mr. Morrison, but I will not be marrying you." "You'll regret this," James snarled, his polished veneer cracking. "When Thornton hangs and you're left with nothing but memories, remember you could have had respectability." "I'll take memories over chains," Clara replied. "Good evening, gentlemen." The days that followed were tense. The ranch was saved. But Clara lived in constant fear for Jake. Reports came in sporadically. He'd been spotted near the Colorado border. He'd robbed a bank in Denver. Impossible, given the timeline. He'd killed 3 men in a shootout. She knew most of it was lies or exaggeration, but each report was a knife to her heart. The Webb brothers were systematically destroying Jake's reputation, ensuring that even if he survived, he'd never be able to clear his name. A week after their parting, Clara was in town collecting supplies when commotion erupted near the telegraph office. A crowd gathered around a posting board where Sheriff Coleman was nailing up a new notice. "Jake Thornton spotted in Culver's Crossing," someone shouted. "Killed 2 of the Webb brothers in a fair fight." Clara's heart leaped. He was alive. But Culver's Crossing was only 50 miles away. Too close. The remaining brothers would never stop now. Not with their kin's blood spilled. She pushed through the crowd, needing to know more. The telegraph operator, young Tommy Henderson, was reading the wire aloud. "Gunfight at Culver's Crossing noon yesterday. Samuel and Eugene Webb called out wanted man Jake Thornton. Thornton killed both in fair fight, multiple witnesses confirm. Thornton wounded but escaped. Remaining Webb brothers vow vengeance. Fair fight, someone muttered. First fair thing in this whole mess. Lucas Hartley spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Don't matter if it was fair, man still wanted. Still worth $1,000 dead or alive. His eyes found Clara in the crowd. Course, might be worth more to someone who knows where he'd run when wounded. Clara turned away, but not before she caught the calculating look in Hartley's eyes. He suspected, had always suspected, her involvement. How long before suspicion turned to action? That night, she sat at her window, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, Jake was hurt again. Running again. The cycle seemed endless. Violence begetting violence. Blood demanding blood. She touched the glass where Polaris shone steady and bright, remembering his words about finding your way home. When my heart calls, she whispered to the night. Will you truly answer? The next morning brought unexpected visitors. An elderly Mexican woman and her grandson appeared at the ranch, asking for work. Rosa Mendoza had healing hands and knowledge of herbs, while her grandson, Miguel, was good with horses. Samuel, still short-handed from the drought, hired them immediately. It was Rosa who approached Clara that evening as she tended the vegetable garden. Señorita, she said quietly, I have a message for you. Clara's hand stilled on the tomato vines. A message? From a man with eyes like storm clouds and a scar that speaks of sorrow. Rosa's weathered face was kind. He saved my grandson from bandits 2 months ago. Asked nothing in return. Now he lies fevered in a place where eagles nest, and he calls one name in his sleep. Clara's heart raced. Where? Rosa described a location in the mountains. A prospector's abandoned cabin high above the tree line. He is badly hurt. Señorita, the bullet stays inside, poisoning his blood. Without help. She shrugged eloquently. Why tell me this? Because love recognizes love. Rosa said simply. And because good men should not die alone in the mountains while evil men prosper in the valleys. Clara made her preparations carefully. She told her family she was riding to the Hendricks Ranch to help with a difficult birthing, a common enough occurrence that no one questioned it. She packed medical supplies, food, ammunition, and warm clothes. The mountains were cold, even in summer. As she saddled Buttercup in the pre-dawn darkness, William appeared in the barn doorway. You're going to him. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. Then take this. He handed her their father's Navy Colt. And Clara, ride fast. Hartley was asking questions in town yesterday, offering money for information about you. She hugged her brother fiercely. Take care of them. Will. Take care of yourself, he replied. And bring him back alive if you can. Anyone who makes my sister smile like she did in that hidden valley can't be all bad. Clara rode out as the first light touched the eastern sky, following Rosa's directions toward the mountains. Behind her, the ranch grew small, then disappeared entirely. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the man who held her heart. The bounty hunters might follow. The Webb brothers would certainly seek vengeance. The law would demand its due. But Clara Bennett had made her choice in a line shack during a storm, and she would not turn back now. She found Polaris in the brightening sky and rode toward it, toward the mountains where eagles soared and wounded outlaws waited for either death or salvation. Her heart had called across the miles, through fever dreams and pain. Now she would discover if love was truly strong enough to bring a man back from the edge of darkness, or if some roads, once taken, led only to sorrow. The rising sun painted the peaks ahead in shades of gold and rose, and Claron spurred Buttercup faster, racing against time and fate and the relentless hunters who would never stop coming. When her heart called, Jake had promised. The heart was calling now, loud and desperate and fierce with love. All that remained was to see if he could still hear it through the gathering shadows of his fading life. The town had descended into chaos. The drought had finally broken 3 days prior with a vengeance. torrential rains that turned streets to mud and washed away the fragile hopes of those already on the edge. Now, with the land temporarily sated, human violence filled the void nature had left. Clara stood in the mercantile, listening to the heated conversations around her. The Webb brothers had raised their personal bounty on Jake to $1,000, matching the official reward. $2,000 total, enough to make any man rich, enough to turn neighbor against neighbor. I heard Thornton was seen near Deadwood, one man said, cleaning his rifle at the counter. No, he's headed for Mexico, another argued. Sam Rodriguez saw him trading horses at the border. Clara kept her expression neutral as she selected supplies. They were all wrong. Jake was holed up in the mountain cabin where she'd nursed him back from the edge of death 2 weeks ago. She'd stayed as long as she dared, until the bullet was out and the fever broken. Then she'd returned home before her absence raised too many questions. Miss Bennett. She turned to find Lucas Hartley blocking her path, his pale eyes glittering with malice and greed. Mr. Hartley, she acknowledged coolly. Funny thing, he said, moving closer. I've been tracking Thornton for weeks now. Man's like a ghost, appears and disappears without a trace. Almost like he's got help. How fascinating, Clara said, trying to step around him. He caught her arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. $2,000 buys a lot of fascinating things. Maybe even the truth from a rancher's daughter who's been sneaking off to the mountains. Let go of me. Or what? You'll shoot me like your outlaw lover shot the Webb boys? His breath was foul with tobacco and whiskey. I've been watching you, girl. I know where you go. One word from me, and... The click of a hammer being cocked interrupted him. William stood behind Hartley, their father's Colt pressed to the bounty hunter's spine. The lady asked you to let go, William said quietly. Hartley released Clara's arm, turning slowly. Boy, you just made a big mistake. No, William said, his young face hard. You did. Touch my sister again and they'll be scraping you off the boardwalk. Sheriff Coleman appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene. Problem here? No problem, Hartley said, but his eyes promised retribution. Just having a friendly chat with Miss Bennett. After he left, William walked Clara home, his hand never leaving his gun. He knows, he said simply. I know. Clara rubbed her bruised arm. It's getting worse. The whole town's gone mad with bounty fever. That evening, as the family finished dinner, the sound of approaching horses made them all tense. Samuel rose, reaching for the shotgun by the door, but it was only Mayor Randolph with an announcement. Emergency town meeting tonight, he said, mopping his sweaty face. The Morrison Bank is calling in all loans immediately. Says the recent rains don't guarantee future prosperity. Clara's blood ran cold. But we paid our note in full. You did, Randolph agreed. But not everyone was so fortunate. Half the county's about to lose their land unless... He hesitated. Unless what? Samuel demanded. Unless someone claims that bounty on Thornton, James Morrison has promised to extend the loans if the threat to public safety is eliminated. After Randolph left, the Bennett family sat in stunned silence. Clara understood now. This wasn't just about justice or vengeance anymore. Morrison was using the situation to consolidate power, to force desperate people into becoming manhunters. I have to warn him, Clara said. Clara, no, Margaret protested. It's too dangerous now. She's right, Samuel said heavily. Every gun in the territory will be looking for him now, and for anyone helping him. But Clara was already moving, gathering what she needed. I won't let him die because James Morrison wants revenge for being rejected. Then we go together, William said. No. Clara's voice was firm. The family needs you here. This is my choice, my risk. She left that night, slipping out under cover of darkness. But she wasn't the only one moving through the shadows. The mountains were alive with hunters now, all converging on rumors and whispers, all dreaming of fortune. Clara took a circuitous route, doubling back several times, using every trick her father had taught her about moving unseen. It was near dawn when she finally reached the hidden cabin. exhausted and soaked from another sudden downpour. She found Jake standing watch at the window, his gun in hand. He turned at her approach, and the relief in his eyes made her heart ache. "Clara, what are you doing here?" "Morrison's weaponized the whole town," she said quickly. "Every man with a gun is coming for you. We have to go now." "Go where?" Jake's laugh was bitter. "There's nowhere left to run." "Then we fight." Clara moved to him, gripping his shoulders. "The Webb brothers are using your name to cover their crimes. Morrison's using the situation to steal land. Maybe it's time to stop running and start exposing the truth." "With what proof? Who'd believe an outlaw over respectable citizens?" Before Clara could answer, the sound of horses echoed through the valley below. Jake doused the lantern, and they crouched by the window, watching as riders spread out in a search pattern. "Must be 20 of them," Jake whispered. "More coming from the east," Clara added. Spotting another group, they were trapped. The cabin had only one door, one window, no back exit, no cellar to hide in. Jake checked his ammunition, not nearly enough for a prolonged fight. "There's a game trail behind the cabin," he said. "Leads up over the ridge. You can make it if you go now. I'm not leaving you." "Clara, no." Her voice was fierce. "We stand together or fall together. That's what love means." Jake pulled her close, kissing her as if trying to memorize the taste of her. "Then we make our stand. But Clara, if things go bad—" "They won't." She checked her own weapon. "Because you're going to do something unexpected. You're going to surrender." "What?" "Not to them," Clara said quickly. "To Sheriff Coleman, publicly, in town. Force a proper trial where the truth can come out. They'll lynch me before I get to trial." "Not if we do this right." Clara's mind raced. Rosa Mendoza. She witnessed the Webb brothers planning the stage robbery. Miguel saw them with the stolen money. Others must have seen things too, but were too scared to speak. A public trial changes that. Jake stared at her. "You're asking me to bet my life on the law that's failed me before?" "No," Clara said. "I'm asking you to bet on the truth, on people's conscience, on the fact that James Morrison overplayed his hand and folks are starting to see it." The riders were getting closer. Soon, they'd spot the cabin. Jake had seconds to decide. "When my heart called," he said softly. "I promised I'd answer." Clara gripped his hand. "My heart's calling now. Jake, it's saying trust me. Trust us. Trust that love is stronger than greed." More hoofbeats, coming from the north. The circle was closing. Jake looked at the woman who'd changed everything, who offered hope when he'd had none. "All right," he said. "We surrender, but not here, not to these jackals. We make it to town, to witnesses." They slipped out the back, leading their horses up the treacherous game trail as the first searchers reached the cabin. Shouts erupted when they found it empty, but Clara and Jake were already climbing higher, using the dawn mist as cover. Behind them, the mountains erupted with activity. The hunt was on. But now it had a different ending in sight, not a shootout in some lonely canyon, but a reckoning in the harsh light of day, where truth would battle greed for the soul of a town gone mad with gold fever. As they crested the ridge, Jake looked back one last time at the cabin that had been his refuge. Then he turned toward town, toward judgment, toward a gamble that love and justice might prevail over bullets and bounties. "When your heart called," he told Clara as they began their descent. "You said to trust. I'm trusting now." She squeezed his hand. "Then let's go shake this town awake." Behind them, the sun rose blood red over the mountains, and the sound of pursuit grew louder. The final act was beginning, and there would be no more running, no more hiding, only truth, consequences, and the slim hope that sometimes, against all odds, the right words spoken at the right moment could stop bullets as surely as any gun. The main street of Coldwater Springs had never seen anything like it. Jake Thornton rode in at high noon, his hands raised but not bound, Clara Bennett beside him with her Winchester across her saddle. Behind them, a growing crowd of bounty hunters, townspeople, and curiosity seekers created a bizarre parade that stretched back to the town limits. "Coleman," Jake called out as they reached the sheriff's office. "I'm surrendering myself for trial." Windows flew open. People poured from buildings. Sheriff Coleman emerged, his weathered face showing complete astonishment. "Thornton, what in blazes?" "I want a proper trial," Jake said clearly, his voice carrying to the gathering crowd. "I want the truth told. All of it." Lucas Hartley pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with rage. "No trial needed for a murderer. String him up now." "Back off, Hartley," Coleman warned, but the mob was growing restless. It was Clara who changed everything. She stood in her stirrups, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Citizens of Coldwater Springs, you want justice? Then let justice be done properly, in daylight, with evidence and witnesses." "What witnesses?" James Morrison appeared, his usual polish replaced by desperate anger. "This man's a killer." Rosa Mendoza witnessed the Webb brothers planning the stage robbery. Clara announced. "Miguel saw them with the stolen money." "Tommy Henderson at the telegraph office has messages proving the Webb brothers were using Jake's name to cover their crimes." A murmur ran through the crowd. Rosa stepped forward from where she'd been watching, her grandson beside her. "Es verdad," she said firmly. "I will testify." "As will I," said an unexpected voice. Dr. Marcus Finch, the town physician, pushed through the crowd. "I treated Eugene Webb 2 nights before the stage robbery. He was drunk, boasting about how they'd pin it on Thornton and collect both the payroll and the bounty." The mood shifted palpably. Morrison's face went white. "These people are lying. Thornton's corrupted them somehow." "The only corruption here," Samuel Bennett said, appearing with William at his side, "is a banker using a town's desperation to turn neighbors into manhunters." More voices joined in. The barkeeper from the Dollar Saloon admitted he'd heard Marcus Webb bragging about the rigged card game that killed Tom Thornton. The stable owner revealed that the Webb brothers had traded horses the night of the robbery. Horses that matched witness descriptions, but it was Jake himself who delivered the crucial blow. "Sheriff, check Morrison's safe. You'll find partnership papers between him and the Webb brothers. They were planning to use the stolen money to buy up drought-stricken ranches." "That's a lie," Morrison shouted, but his protest rang hollow. Coleman studied Jake for a long moment, then made his decision. "Hartley, Morrison, step back. Thornton's in my custody now, and there will be a trial." "No!" Hartley went for his gun, but Jake was faster, even with his hands raised. He dove from his horse, tackling the bounty hunter as the gun fired wild. They rolled in the dusty street, fighting for control of the weapon. The crack of Clara's Winchester ended it. Her shot took Hartley's gun from his hand, sending it spinning into the dirt. Jake rolled away, breathing hard, as Coleman and his deputies moved in. "That's enough," the sheriff roared. "Anyone else wants to challenge the law? Speak up now." The crowd fell silent. Morrison tried to slip away, but townspeople blocked his path. The truth was a dam burst now, flooding the streets with long-suppressed testimony. The trial took place 3 days later in the town hall. Judge William Brennan presiding. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. Clara sat in the front row, her presence a steady anchor for Jake. One by one, witnesses testified. Rosa Mendoza spoke of overhearing the Webb brothers' plans. Dr. Finch repeated Eugene Webb's drunken boasts. Tommy Henderson produced telegraph records showing the Webb brothers had sent messages coordinating their crimes. The most damning evidence came from Morrison's own safe, partnership documents, correspondence, detailed plans to use the chaos to seize control of the county's land. The banker sat white-faced as his empire of greed crumbled. When Jake finally took the stand, the courtroom was silent as a grave. He spoke simply, without embellishment, about his brother's death, about tracking Marcus Webb, about the kill-or-be-killed moment in the saloon. "I don't claim to be innocent," he said, looking directly at the judge. "I killed Marcus Webb, but it wasn't murder. It was the only justice my brother would ever see." The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the foreman stood. "On the charge of murder, We find the defendant not guilty by reason of self-defense and extreme provocation." The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, others protested. But the verdict stood. Morrison was arrested for conspiracy and fraud. The surviving Webb brothers, faced with mounting evidence, fled the territory. As Jake stepped into the afternoon sun, a free man for the first time in months, Clara was there waiting. They embraced as the crowd dispersed, some offering congratulations, others turning away in disgust. "It's not over," Jake warned quietly. "There'll always be those who see me as an outlaw. Then we'll face them together." Clara replied, "Besides, I've been thinking, California's nice this time of year, lots of land for a horse ranch." Jake pulled back to look at her. "You'd leave everything, your family, your home." "My home," Clara said firmly, "is wherever you are." Samuel Bennett approached, William beside him. The older man extended his hand to Jake. "You saved my ranch, son. Least I can do is wish you well. Take care of her," William added, though his grin suggested he knew Clara needed little taking care of. "With my life," Jake promised. 3 mornings later, as dawn painted the sky in shades of pearl and gold, 2 riders headed west. They rode side by side, pack horses trailing behind, loaded with supplies for a new beginning. The drought had broken, and the grasslands stretched green and promising toward the horizon. Clara looked back once at the town sleeping in the morning mist, then forward to the mountains and whatever lay beyond. Beside her, Jake sat easy in the saddle, the haunted look finally fading from his gray eyes. "No regrets?" he asked. "None," she said. "We carry our scars and our memories, but we ride toward tomorrow." They had each other. They had freedom. They had a chance to build something clean and good from the ashes of violence and pain. The money that had saved the Bennett Ranch would help them start their horse ranch in California, where the past couldn't follow and the future waited to be written. As they crested the first rise, Jake reached over and took Clara's hand. "When your heart called," he said softly. I answered. "And when mine called," Clara replied, "you came back." They rode on in comfortable silence. 2 souls who had found each other in the crucible of the Wild West, who had faced down death and injustice and emerged scarred but whole. Behind them, the sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows of night. Ahead, the trail wound through valleys and over mountains, leading to a place where former outlaws could become ranchers and strong women could be partners rather than property. The West was still wild, still dangerous, but it was also vast enough to hold dreams as big as the sky. And Clara Bennett, soon to be Clara Thornton, rode toward those dreams with the man who had taught her that sometimes the most dangerous journey was the one that led to your own heart. In the distance, an eagle soared on the morning thermals, free and fierce against the endless blue. Clara smiled, understanding at last that freedom wasn't the absence of chains, but the courage to break them. And that love wasn't a cage, but wings strong enough to carry 2 hearts home. The legend would be told for years in Coldwater Springs, of the rancher's daughter who saved an outlaw, of the outlaw who chose truth over running, of the love that survived drought and bullets and the greed of powerful men. But Jake and Clara rode beyond legend into life itself, carrying only what mattered: each other, hope, and the promise of tomorrow in a land where anything was possible if you were brave enough to reach for it. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long drive? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Jake's journey in the comments below. Your feedback and stories mean the world to us. Until our next adventure in the untamed frontier, partners.